My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 32, I run a billion-dollar investment firm from the 42nd floor of Chicago's Willis Tower. But tonight, I'm sitting at the back table of the Pfister Hotel ballroom in Milwaukee, staring at an empty plate while my father gives his retirement speech to 300 guests. The catering staff had somehow forgotten to order my meal, a small oversight that would have remained unnoticed, except for one crucial detail they didn't know about me. When Patricia Williams, the board chairman of Great Lakes Industrial Holdings, stood up and asked loudly why the board chairman at table 12 didn't have food, the entire room fell silent. What happened next changed my relationship with my family forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the only daughter of Robert Mitchell meant navigating a world where success was measured in quarterly earnings and market share, not the academic achievements that came naturally to me. My earliest memory of feeling invisible happened during a family barbecue when I was 9 years old. Dad was discussing a potential acquisition with my uncles, while my brothers David and Michael, then 12 and 6, listened intently from the picnic table. When I asked what a hostile takeover meant, having overheard the term and looked it up in the dictionary, my father chuckled and told me to help Mom with the potato salad. That was the first time I understood that my curiosity about business was seen as cute rather than serious, a pattern that would define our relationship for decades. Bob Mitchell had built Mitchell Manufacturing Solutions from a small tool shop in Milwaukee's industrial district into a regional powerhouse supplying equipment to factories across the Midwest. He started with nothing but a high school diploma and an unshakable belief that hard work could overcome any obstacle. By the time I was born, the company employed over 400 people and had expanded into 3 states. Dad's philosophy was simple and unwavering. Manufacturing built America, he would say during Sunday dinners, and manufacturing would sustain it. Real businesses made real things that people could touch and use. Everything else was just paper pushing. My mother Linda brought warmth to our household that balanced Dad's relentless focus on business. A former English teacher who had given up her career when David was born, she encouraged my love of reading and mathematics with quiet determination. While Dad taught my brothers about profit margins and supply chains, Mom would sit with me at the kitchen table helping me work through calculus problems or discussing the novels I devoured. She understood that I processed the world differently than my brothers, that I saw patterns and possibilities where they saw only immediate problems to solve. When I expressed interest in finance during high school, she was the one who researched college programs and encouraged me to aim higher than the state universities my brothers would eventually attend. Mom's death from ovarian cancer during my sophomore year at Harvard Business School created a void that no one in our family knew how to fill. She had been the translator between Dad's practical worldview and my academic ambitions, the one person who saw potential in both paths. At her funeral, while relatives offered condolences and shared memories, I overheard Dad talking to his business partner Frank Peterson near the cemetery gates. "At least the boys understand the real world," he said, his voice carrying further than he intended. "Sarah's got her head in the clouds with all those theories and numbers that don't mean anything when you're trying to meet payroll." The words hit me like a physical blow, confirming what I had always suspected but hoped wasn't true. That conversation at Mom's funeral crystallized something important for me. I realized that I had been seeking validation from someone who fundamentally didn't understand what I was trying to build. Dad saw my Harvard MBA as expensive paper, my internships at investment banks as playing with other people's money, my fascination with market analysis as academic theory with no real-world application. He couldn't see that I was learning to understand businesses from the inside out, to identify potential and risk in ways that could transform entire industries. The gap between us wasn't just about gender or generation. It was about completely different definitions of what constituted valuable work. 3 incidents stand out as defining moments in our relationship, each one reinforcing the distance that had grown between us since Mom's death. The first happened during my junior year at Harvard when I won the case competition for analyzing distressed manufacturing companies. The victory came with a $10,000 prize and recognition from some of the most respected professors in the program. When I called home to share the news, Dad's response was lukewarm congratulations, followed by a suggestion that I should use the prize money to visit my brothers more often, since I was always so busy with school. He had missed the significance entirely, treating my academic achievement like a hobby that was keeping me from family obligations. The second defining moment occurred 6 months after graduation when I accepted my first position at Goldman Sachs in their Chicago office. Dad had assumed I would return to Milwaukee and find a nice job at a local bank or accounting firm, something that would keep me close to home and available for family gatherings. When I explained that I would be working in mergers and acquisitions, helping companies navigate complex financial transactions, he asked if that meant I would be a secretary for important meetings. The question revealed how little he understood about my education or capabilities, how completely he had dismissed the possibility that I might have real influence in the business world. The third incident happened 2 years later when I was promoted to vice president, ahead of colleagues who had been with the firm longer. It was an unprecedented recognition of my analytical skills and client relationship abilities, something that typically took 4 or 5 years to achieve. When I shared the news during a family dinner, Dad's response was to ask if my promotion came with a good health insurance plan and whether I was saving enough money to eventually settle down. He couldn't see the promotion as validation of my professional competence, only as a stepping stone to what he considered my real purpose in life. My brothers weren't malicious, just comfortable in a system that had always favored them without requiring any effort on their part. David had joined Mitchell Manufacturing straight out of college and worked his way up through various departments, learning operations, and eventually taking over sales and marketing. Michael had followed a similar path after his brief attempt at studying business administration, joining the company as a project manager, and gradually assuming responsibility for logistics and supply chain management. Both were competent in their roles, but their positions had been essentially guaranteed from birth. They never had to prove themselves the way I did, never had to justify their interest in business or defend their career choices. Occasionally I would catch David watching me during family gatherings with something that might have been regret or recognition. Once, after Dad had dismissed my explanation of how private equity worked by saying it sounded like gambling with fancy names, David pulled me aside and apologized for our father's attitude. "You know how he is about anything that isn't manufacturing," he said, as if that explained decades of being treated like my career was an amusing distraction. Michael was less aware of the dynamic, accepting Dad's worldview without much reflection, but he wasn't deliberately cruel. He simply existed in a reality where his path had always been clear and unquestioned. After 5 years at Goldman Sachs, I surprised everyone by accepting an offer to join Midwest Financial Group as their youngest senior vice president. The move back to the Chicago area meant I was geographically closer to family but professionally in a completely different universe. Midwest Financial specialized in middle-market companies, often family-owned businesses that needed capital for expansion or succession planning. It was work that required understanding both the financial metrics that drove valuations and the emotional dynamics that influenced family business decisions. I was particularly skilled at helping founders transition ownership to the next generation, having witnessed firsthand how complicated those relationships could become. My success at Midwest Financial exceeded even my own expectations. Within 3 years, I had built the most profitable division in the company's history, focusing on manufacturing and industrial companies throughout the Great Lakes region. My ability to understand both the operational challenges these businesses faced and the financial structures that could address them made me invaluable to clients who had been skeptical about working with investment bankers. When the board chairman position became available following the retirement of the previous holder, I was the unanimous choice, despite being 15 years younger than any previous appointee. The appointment made national business news, with Forbes running a feature story about my rise in what had traditionally been an old boys network. The article detailed my track record of successful deals and my reputation for understanding family-owned businesses in ways that East Coast investment banks often missed. Dad's reaction to the media coverage was typically understated. "That's nice, honey," he said when I mentioned the article during a brief phone call. "I hope all that attention doesn't go to your head." He still couldn't see my achievements as legitimate success, only as temporary recognition that would eventually fade when I came back to Earth. Our relationship had settled into a polite distance, maintained through holiday gatherings and occasional family events. We exchanged pleasantries about work without any real substance, Dad asking generic questions about my job without remembering my answers from previous conversations. He never asked about specific deals I was working on, or showed interest in the companies I was helping to grow. To him, I remained the daughter who had chosen an incomprehensible career path that kept her busy with unimportant activities. The fact that I now controlled more capital than Mitchell Manufacturing had ever generated was irrelevant to his understanding of real business. When the invitation to Dad's retirement dinner arrived at my Chicago office, delivered by his longtime assistant Helen Rodriguez, I stared at the elegant cardstock for several minutes before opening it. The envelope was addressed to Miss Sarah Mitchell, with no indication of my professional title or position, as if I were still the college student who occasionally visited home. Inside, the invitation announced the retirement celebration for Robert J. Mitchell, after 42 years of leadership at Mitchell Manufacturing Solutions. The event would take place at the Pfister Hotel's Grand Ballroom, with cocktails beginning at 6 and dinner served at 7:30. RSVP required by the 15th of the month. Ryan found me still holding the invitation when he arrived at my apartment that evening. My boyfriend of 18 months understood the complicated dynamics of family businesses from his work as a corporate psychologist, helping companies navigate leadership transitions and family conflicts. He took one look at my expression and knew immediately what had arrived in the mail. "Are you planning to go?" he asked, settling beside me on the couch and taking the invitation to examine it more closely. His tone was carefully neutral, recognizing that this decision carried emotional weight beyond a simple social obligation. "I should go," I replied, though even as I said it I felt my stomach tighten with anxiety. "He's my father, and this is an important milestone." The rational part of my mind knew that attending was the right thing to do, but another part of me dreaded spending an evening watching Dad receive accolades for building the kind of business he considered real and worthwhile, while my own achievements remained invisible to him. Ryan nodded thoughtfully, understanding both my sense of duty and my reluctance to subject myself to another evening of feeling like an outsider in my own family. Jessica was more direct when I told her about the invitation during our weekly lunch at a restaurant near her law firm. She had been my closest friend since our Harvard days, and had witnessed enough Mitchell family interactions to understand the dynamics involved. "He'll find a way to make the entire evening about how proud he is of David and Michael," she predicted, stabbing her salad with more force than necessary. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You'll sit there listening to speeches about carrying on the family legacy while being completely ignored. Her bluntness was sometimes uncomfortable, but it usually reflected truths I was reluctant to acknowledge. The call from David came 2 days later, as I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office overlooking Lake Michigan. "Sarah, I'm glad I caught you," he said, his voice carrying the slightly formal tone he used when discussing family obligations. "We're putting together a tribute presentation for Dad's dinner, and I was hoping you could contribute something, maybe some family photos or a memory about growing up with him." The request was reasonable, but something about his phrasing suggested that my contribution would be minimal, a small addition to the main narrative being constructed by my brothers. Despite feeling excluded from the planning process, I spent considerable time selecting photographs and crafting a written tribute that highlighted Dad's genuine strengths without dwelling on our complicated relationship. I found pictures from my childhood that showed him teaching me to ride a bike, attending my high school graduation, and celebrating various family milestones before Mom's illness. The tribute I wrote focused on his work ethic, his commitment to his employees, and his role in Milwaukee's manufacturing community. I tried to be generous while remaining honest, acknowledging his accomplishments without pretending our relationship was something it wasn't. Choosing what to wear to the dinner required careful consideration. I finally settled on a tailored black dress with subtle architectural details, conservative enough for a family celebration but sophisticated enough to reflect my professional status. The dress was expensive but understated, chosen to project competence without calling excessive attention to itself. I paired it with my grandmother's pearls and the watch I had bought myself when I made senior vice president, small symbols of both family connection and personal achievement. The question of whether to bring Ryan occupied my thoughts for several days. He had offered to attend as moral support, understanding that family gatherings were often emotionally challenging for me. But something about this particular evening felt like a test that I needed to face alone. A final opportunity to see if Dad could recognize who I had become without external influences affecting the dynamic. "This is between him and me," I explained to Ryan the night before the dinner. "Having you there might make it easier, but easier isn't always what's needed." The Pfister Hotel's grand ballroom was transformed for the occasion, with round tables draped in white linens and centerpieces of blue and silver flowers reflecting Mitchell Manufacturing's corporate colors. Company banners hung strategically around the room, displaying the logo that had become synonymous with quality industrial equipment throughout the region. A registration table near the entrance was staffed by Helen Rodriguez and another longtime employee, checking names against the guest list and directing attendees to their assigned seats. The room buzzed with conversation as business associates, employees, and family friends gathered to honor Dad's 4 decades of leadership. I arrived exactly on time, slipping past the photographer who was capturing guests against a backdrop featuring the company's achievements over the years. The cocktail hour was already underway, with servers circulating among clusters of people holding wine glasses and engaging in the kind of networking conversations that characterized business gatherings. I recognized many faces from previous company events, though most seemed surprised to see me there, as if they had forgotten I was part of the Mitchell family. Several people approached with polite inquiries about my life in Chicago, their questions generic enough to avoid revealing how little they knew about my actual work. Dad was holding court near the bar, surrounded by his golf foursome and several board members from Mitchell Manufacturing. He looked distinguished in his navy suit, every inch the successful executive who had built something meaningful from modest beginnings. When he spotted me approaching, he excused himself from his conversation and offered me a brief hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "Sarah, you made it," he said, his eyes already scanning the room for more important people to acknowledge. "You look professional," which I took as a compliment despite its backhanded nature. David and Michael found me near the registration table, both looking comfortable in their roles as the heirs apparent to Dad's legacy. They greeted me with genuine warmth, and we spent several minutes catching up on surface-level family news. David mentioned that Amanda was expecting their second child, while Michael talked about the vacation he and Karen had taken to Florida. The conversation was pleasant but superficial, avoiding any topics that might create tension or reveal the fundamental differences in how we experience the Mitchell family dynamic. When the dinner bell chimed, guests began moving toward their assigned tables. I checked the seating chart and found my name at table 12, positioned near the back of the room among distant relatives and mid-level employees. David and Michael were seated at the head table with Dad, their wives beside them in positions of honor. The arrangement told the familiar story of my place in the family hierarchy, relegated to the periphery while my brothers occupied the spotlight. I made my way to table 12, greeting the other guests politely, while noting that none of them seemed to know exactly who I was or why I was there. The table included Dad's cousin Margaret and her husband, 2 supervisors from the manufacturing floor, and Helen Rodriguez with her spouse. They were all pleasant people who made genuine efforts at conversation, but the topics remained safely generic. Several mentioned how proud Dad must be of his sons and their future leadership of the company, comments that I acknowledged with non-committal smiles. Nobody asked about my work or seemed aware that I had any professional life worth discussing. As servers began delivering the first course, I noticed that my place setting remained empty while everyone around me received their salads. I assumed it was a temporary oversight and waited patiently for the mistake to be corrected. When the soup course arrived and I still had no food, Helen looked concerned and flagged down a server. The young man apologized profusely and promised to resolve the issue immediately, but the main course was served without any meal appearing at my place. The oversight was becoming awkward, with my table mates offering to share their food while servers scrambled to understand what had gone wrong. It was during this confusion that Patricia Williams, board chairman of Great Lakes Industrial Holdings, stood up at her table near the front of the room. Patricia was a formidable woman in her early 60s, who had built her reputation by transforming struggling companies into profitable enterprises. She was known throughout the region for her sharp intellect and direct communication style, qualities that had made her one of the most respected business leaders in the Midwest. Her presence at Dad's retirement dinner reflected the significance of Mitchell Manufacturing within the larger industrial community. Patricia's voice carried clearly across the ballroom as she addressed the room with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Excuse me, but I'm concerned that there seems to be a problem with the service at table 12. She gestured in our direction, her expression serious and slightly irritated. "The board chairman appears not to have received her meal, and I think we need to address this situation immediately." Her words created a ripple of confusion throughout the room, as people turned to look toward our table, trying to understand what she was talking about. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Dad looked genuinely puzzled, his gaze moving from Patricia to our table and back again as he tried to process what was happening. David and Michael exchanged confused glances, clearly uncertain about who Patricia was referring to or why she was making such a point about a simple catering error. The servers stood frozen, equally bewildered by the sudden attention being paid to what they had assumed was a minor oversight in meal service. Patricia continued, her voice growing firmer as she addressed the room's confusion. "I'm referring to Sarah Mitchell, board chairman of Midwest Financial Group, who appears to be seated at table 12 without any food service." She gestured toward me directly, ensuring that everyone in the room understood exactly who she was talking about. As a colleague and fellow board chairman, I find it concerning that such an oversight would occur at a professional gathering of this caliber. The reaction was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as 300 guests turned to stare at me, their expressions ranging from surprise to disbelief. At the head table, Dad's face had gone completely pale, his mouth slightly open as he processed Patricia's words. David looked stunned, while Michael appeared to be struggling to understand what he had just heard. The servers began moving quickly toward our table, suddenly understanding that this was not just any guest who had been overlooked, but someone whose presence carried significant weight in the business community. In that moment, as the entire room focused on me with new understanding, I realized that everything was about to change. The daughter who had been dismissed as a paper pusher playing with numbers was suddenly revealed as someone who commanded respect from industry leaders. The family member relegated to the back of the room was actually a peer of the guest of honor's own superiors. The oversight in meal service had accidentally exposed the truth about who I had become while my family wasn't paying attention. Patricia's intervention had done more than correct a catering error. It had forced my family to see me through the eyes of the professional community, where I had built my reputation and established my credibility. The woman they thought of as Bob Mitchell's daughter with the incomprehensible job was actually Sarah Mitchell, one of the youngest and most successful executives in the regional financial industry. The revelation hung in the air like electricity, charging the atmosphere with tension and possibility, as we all grappled with this new reality. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds. I could feel every eye in the ballroom trained on me, waiting for some kind of response or explanation. Patricia Williams remained standing, her authoritative presence ensuring that this moment wouldn't simply dissolve into polite murmurs and forgotten awkwardness. She had thrown down a gauntlet without realizing it, forcing my family to confront a reality they had been ignoring for years. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 300 gazes following my movement. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, my voice carrying further than I had intended in the hushed ballroom. "I appreciate your concern about the service." My words were measured and professional, the tone I used in boardrooms when navigating delicate negotiations. "It's really not a problem, though I do appreciate being recognized for who I am rather than just whose daughter I happen to be." The implications of my response rippled through the room like stones dropped in still water. Some guests nodded in understanding, business leaders who recognized the significance of Patricia's acknowledgement. Others looked confused, still processing the disconnect between their assumptions about Bob Mitchell's daughter and the reality of Sarah Mitchell, board chairman. At the head table, my father remained frozen, his expressions cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and something that might have been the beginning of comprehension. Patricia smiled with satisfaction, clearly pleased that her intervention had achieved its intended effect. She had spent decades breaking through barriers in male-dominated industries and recognized when another woman was being diminished or overlooked. Her decision to speak up wasn't just about correcting a catering error. It was about ensuring that professional accomplishments were acknowledged regardless of family dynamics or gender expectations. She nodded toward me with obvious respect before settling back into her seat, confident that she had made her point. The servers descended on our table with apologetic efficiency, bringing not just my delayed meal but additional appetizers and wine as compensation for the oversight. Their suddenly deferential treatment was almost amusing, the stark contrast between being ignored and being catered to highlighting how quickly perceptions could shift when context changed. Helen Rodriguez watched the flurry of activity with barely concealed amusement, having worked for my father long enough to understand family dynamics but never having realized the extent of my professional success. Conversation gradually resumed throughout the ballroom, but the energy had fundamentally shifted. People kept glancing toward table 12, reassessing their understanding of who I was and why my presence at the dinner might be more significant than they had initially assumed. I could see business associates whispering to each other, some pulling out phones to undoubtedly search for information about Midwest Financial Group and its leadership. The woman they had dismissed as a family afterthought was suddenly someone worth knowing. David was the first of my brothers to approach our table, his face flushed with what appeared to be a combination of embarrassment and curiosity. He leaned down beside my chair, speaking quietly enough that our conversation wouldn't carry to neighboring tables. "Sarah, I had no idea about your position," he said, his voice sincere but uncertain. "Board chairman of Midwest Financial? That's incredible. Why didn't you ever mention it during family gatherings or phone calls?" The question revealed so much about how our family communicated, or rather, how we had failed to communicate meaningfully for years. I looked at David with a mixture of sadness and resignation, recognizing that his ignorance wasn't entirely his fault, but was symptomatic of a larger pattern of dismissal and assumptions. "I've mentioned my work many times, David," I replied gently. "You just never asked follow-up questions, or seemed particularly interested in the details. When someone consistently treats your career as a hobby, you eventually stop trying to explain its significance." David's expression shifted as he processed my words, understanding beginning to dawn on his face. He had participated in countless family conversations where my professional life was glossed over or relegated to brief, superficial updates. While his and Michael's business activities were discussed in detail, analyzed, and celebrated, my achievements had been acknowledged with polite nods before conversation moved to more interesting topics. The pattern had been so consistent that it had become invisible, normalized through repetition until no one questioned why one family member's success was treated so differently from another's. Michael joined us shortly after, his approach more hesitant than David's, but his curiosity equally evident. He sat down in the empty chair beside me, having abandoned his position at the head table to understand what was happening. "Board chairman," he said slowly, testing the words as if trying to comprehend their meaning. "That means you're like the top person at your company, right? The CEO reports to you?" His question was almost childlike in its simplicity, revealing how little he understood about corporate structures or my role within them. I nodded, choosing to be patient with his genuine desire to understand rather than defensive about his ignorance. "Midwest Financial Group manages about $2.7 billion in assets," I explained, watching his eyes widen at the number. "We specialize in middle-market companies, helping them with acquisitions, expansions, and succession planning. A lot of our clients are family-owned manufacturing companies, actually. Companies very similar to Mitchell Manufacturing in size and structure." The parallel to our family business hung in the air between us, unspoken but clearly understood. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. While Dad had spent years dismissing my work as theoretical and irrelevant, I had been building expertise in exactly the kind of business challenges that Mitchell Manufacturing would eventually face. My understanding of family business dynamics, succession planning, and capital structure could have been invaluable to their long-term strategy, but those conversations had never happened because my input had never been sought or valued. I had become an expert in their world while being excluded from it. As dinner progressed, I found myself at the center of attention in ways that felt both validating and overwhelming. Business leaders who had barely acknowledged my presence earlier in the evening now approached our table, introducing themselves and expressing interest in future conversations. Several mentioned specific deals they had heard about through industry networks, transactions where Midwest Financial had played a crucial role in helping companies navigate complex challenges. Their recognition of my professional reputation felt surreal in the context of a family gathering where I had always been peripheral. Frank Peterson, Dad's longtime business partner and golf buddy, spent nearly 15 minutes at our table asking detailed questions about private equity and succession planning. He had been one of the people earlier in the evening who had inquired politely about my life in Chicago, while clearly not expecting any substantive answer. Now he was taking notes on his phone, genuinely interested in understanding how investment banking worked and what services might be relevant to Mitchell Manufacturing's future. The transformation in his attitude was dramatic and somewhat disorienting. Margaret, Dad's cousin, watched these interactions with growing amazement. She had known me since childhood but had always seen me through the lens of family relationships rather than professional accomplishment. "Sarah, honey," she said during a brief lull in the parade of visitors, "I had no idea you were so successful in business. Your father must be incredibly proud of what you've built." Her comment was well-intentioned but highlighted the gap between assumption and reality that had characterized my family relationships for years. The evening's program continued around us, but the focus had fundamentally shifted. When the tribute video played, showing Dad's journey from small business owner to regional manufacturing leader, I watched with new awareness of how similar our paths had actually been. Both of us had built something significant from ambitious beginnings, both had faced skepticism and overcome obstacles, both had earned respect within our respective industries. The difference was that his achievements had always been celebrated and acknowledged, while mine had been invisible to the people whose approval I had unconsciously sought. Dad's speech, when it came, felt anticlimactic after the evening's earlier revelations. He spoke eloquently about building Mitchell Manufacturing, about the importance of family legacy, and about his pride in David and Michael's readiness to take over leadership. He mentioned me briefly, noting that all his children had found their own paths in life, but the reference felt perfunctory and disconnected from the reality that had been revealed earlier. He seemed to be struggling with how to acknowledge what he had learned about my career without admitting how completely he had misunderstood it for years. The applause following Dad's speech was enthusiastic, but felt somehow hollow to me. I clapped politely while processing the complexity of my emotions. Pride in his genuine accomplishments mixed with frustration at his continued inability to see me clearly, even after Patricia's intervention had forced the issue. He had spent 42 years building something meaningful, and that deserved recognition regardless of our personal dynamics. But his speech had also reinforced the pattern of acknowledgement and exclusion that had shaped our relationship throughout my adult life. After the formal program concluded, the evening transitioned into more relaxed socializing. People moved between tables, renewing old friendships and making new professional connections. I found myself engaged in more substantial conversations than I had ever experienced at a family gathering. Discussions about market trends, regulatory changes, and business strategy that demonstrated respect for my expertise and opinion. The contrast with previous Mitchell family events was stark and somewhat overwhelming. Patricia Williams approached our table as the evening was winding down, her presence commanding attention even in the more casual atmosphere. "Sarah," she said, extending her hand in a firm handshake, "I wanted to speak with you before leaving. I've been following Midwest Financial's work in the manufacturing sector, and I'm impressed with your approach to family business succession planning. We should schedule lunch soon to discuss some potential collaboration opportunities." Her invitation was clearly professional rather than social, recognizing me as a peer rather than just another guest at a retirement dinner. The offer represented exactly the kind of opportunity that could expand Midwest Financial's reach into larger markets and more complex transactions. Patricia's network and reputation would open doors that might otherwise remain closed, creating possibilities for growth that I had been working toward for years. The irony that this connection was being made at my father's retirement dinner, in front of family members who had never understood the significance of my work, wasn't lost on me. Professional recognition was coming from an unexpected source at an unexpected moment. As Patricia walked away, I noticed Dad watching our interaction from across the room. His expression was difficult to read, combining what appeared to be confusion, curiosity, and perhaps the beginning of reassessment. For the first time in years, he seemed to be seeing me as something other than his daughter, who had chosen an incomprehensible career path. The woman commanding respect from industry leaders was the same person he had dismissed as playing with numbers rather than building something real. The disconnect between his perception and reality was becoming impossible to ignore. The evening's revelations had created a fundamental shift that couldn't be easily undone or forgotten. Family members who had never asked meaningful questions about my work now understood that their assumptions had been dramatically wrong. Business associates who had known Dad for decades were reassessing their understanding of his family dynamics. Most importantly, I was confronting the reality that professional success hadn't filled the emotional void created by years of feeling unseen and undervalued by the people whose opinions mattered most to me. The drive back to Chicago the following morning gave me time to process what had happened at the retirement dinner. The 2-hour journey along Lake Michigan usually provided peaceful transition time between my Milwaukee family obligations and my Chicago professional life. But today, the familiar route felt charged with new significance. Patricia Williams's intervention had fundamentally altered the dynamics between my family and me in ways that couldn't be easily reversed or ignored. My phone had been buzzing since early morning with text messages from both brothers, each expressing some version of shock and curiosity about my professional position. David's messages were longer and more thoughtful, asking specific questions about how long I had been board chairman and why I had never shared details about my role. Michael's texts were shorter but equally bewildered, admitting that he had no idea what my job actually involved, and asking if we could talk soon about what being board chairman meant. The messages revealed how little attention my family had paid to my professional life over the years. Information about my promotions, achievements, and responsibilities had been shared during family gatherings and phone calls, but it had apparently been filtered through preconceptions that prevented them from understanding its significance. When someone has already decided that your work isn't important, they stop hearing details that might contradict their assumptions. My family had been practicing selective attention for so long that they had missed my entire career trajectory. Ryan was waiting at my apartment with coffee and bagels, having understood that I would need time to decompress after the emotional complexity of the evening. He listened thoughtfully as I recounted Patricia's intervention and my family's shocked reactions, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting me work through my thoughts aloud. His background in corporate psychology gave him insight into family business dynamics that helped me understand the broader implications of what had occurred. "You've been invisible to them for years," he observed after I finished describing the evening's events. "Not because they don't love you, but because they couldn't see past their own assumptions about what your career meant. Last night forced them to confront the gap between their perception and reality, and that's going to be uncomfortable for everyone involved. The question now is what you want to do with this opportunity for change." His analysis was accurate but complicated. Part of me felt vindicated by the recognition and respect I had received from business leaders at the dinner, but another part felt sad about how long it had taken for my family to see me clearly. The professional validation was gratifying, but it couldn't entirely compensate for years of feeling dismissed and undervalued by the people whose approval I had unconsciously sought. Recognition from strangers, however prestigious, wasn't the same as acknowledgement from family members who had known me since childhood. Jessica's reaction when I called her later that afternoon was characteristically direct and insightful. She had predicted that Dad would find ways to center the evening around my brother's achievements, but even she hadn't anticipated the dramatic reversal that actually occurred. "So you accidentally became the most important person in the room," she said with obvious satisfaction. I bet that felt amazing and terrible at the same time. Her understanding of my complex emotions was perfect, recognizing both the triumph and the underlying sadness of the situation. The story had apparently traveled quickly through Chicago's financial community. By Monday morning, several colleagues mentioned having heard about the retirement dinner incident through various networking channels. The business world was smaller than people realized, and news about board chairmen being overlooked at family gatherings was the kind of story that spread rapidly through professional circles. My assistant Marcus mentioned that several reporters had called requesting interviews about women in leadership and family business dynamics, topics that had become more relevant following recent articles about gender bias in corporate America. I declined the interview requests, preferring to keep family matters private, but the attention highlighted how my situation reflected broader patterns in business and society. Women in leadership positions often face challenges in gaining recognition and respect, even from their own families, particularly when their success occurred in industries or roles that weren't immediately understood or valued. My experience wasn't unique, but the public nature of the revelation made it newsworthy in ways that I found both flattering and uncomfortable. The call from Dad came on Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office. His voice sounded uncertain, lacking the confidence that typically characterized his communication style. "Sarah," he said after the usual pleasantries, "I was hoping we could talk about what happened at the dinner the other night. I realize there are things about your career that I haven't understood properly, and I'd like to learn more if you're willing to explain them." His request was unprecedented in our relationship. Dad had never asked detailed questions about my work or expressed genuine curiosity about my professional accomplishments. His tone suggested humility rather than casual interest, recognizing that his ignorance about my career reflected poorly on him as a father and indicating a desire to correct that oversight. The conversation represented a potential turning point in our relationship, but I approached it cautiously after years of disappointment and misunderstanding. We arranged to meet for lunch the following Saturday at a restaurant in downtown Milwaukee, neutral territory that would allow for private conversation without the distractions of family gatherings or business environments. I spent considerable time preparing for the meeting, not because I doubted my ability to explain my work, but because I wanted to be thoughtful about how much vulnerability to risk in rebuilding our relationship. Trust, once damaged, required careful reconstruction. The lunch meeting exceeded my expectations in ways that were both encouraging and emotionally complex. Dad asked detailed questions about Midwest Financial's business model, my responsibilities as board chairman, and the types of companies we typically worked with. His questions demonstrated genuine interest rather than polite obligation, and his attention to my answers suggested that he was finally trying to understand, rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. For the first time in our relationship, he seemed to see me as a professional peer rather than just his daughter, who worked in an incomprehensible field. When I explained that many of our clients were family-owned manufacturing companies facing succession planning challenges, his expression grew thoughtful. "Those are exactly the kinds of issues that keep me awake at night," he admitted. "David and Michael are good men, but running a company requires different skills than they've developed so far. I've been putting off conversations about succession planning because I wasn't sure how to structure the transition properly." His admission revealed vulnerabilities that he had never shared with me before, treating me as someone whose expertise might be valuable rather than irrelevant. The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. For years, I had been developing expertise that directly applied to Mitchell Manufacturing's future challenges. But those conversations had never happened because Dad had dismissed my work as theoretical rather than practical. Now, at age 64 and facing retirement, he was discovering that his daughter might have insights that could help secure the company's future. The recognition was gratifying, but tinged with sadness about the opportunities for collaboration that had been lost due to his preconceptions. Our conversation continued for nearly 3 hours, covering topics that ranged from specific business challenges to broader questions about legacy and family relationships. Dad spoke more openly about his fears regarding the company's future than I had ever heard him discuss with anyone. He worried about whether David and Michael had the vision and skills necessary to adapt the business to changing markets, whether the company's traditional approaches would remain viable, and whether he had prepared them adequately for the responsibilities they would inherit. His concerns were legitimate and reflected common challenges in family business succession. Many founders struggled with transitioning leadership to the next generation, particularly when the business environment was evolving rapidly and requiring new approaches to remain competitive. Dad's manufacturing background and practical experience were valuable assets, but they might not be sufficient for navigating the technological and market changes that Mitchell Manufacturing would face in coming years. I found myself offering perspective and insights that drew on my experience with similar companies, discussing strategies for leadership development, capital structure optimization, and succession planning that could address his concerns. The conversation felt natural and productive, the kind of professional dialogue that I engaged in regularly with clients but had never experienced with my father. For the first time, he was treating my expertise as valuable and relevant, rather than abstract and impractical. The transformation in Dad's attitude was remarkable, but also somewhat disorienting. After years of having my professional accomplishments dismissed or ignored, suddenly being consulted as an expert created cognitive dissonance that I struggled to process. Part of me felt vindicated and relieved that he was finally seeing me clearly, but another part remained guarded after decades of disappointment. Trust rebuilt slowly, and one conversation couldn't erase years of feeling undervalued and misunderstood. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Dad made a request that surprised me further. "Would you consider attending our next board meeting?" he asked. Not as my daughter, but as a professional consultant who might offer perspective on succession planning and strategic direction. "David and Michael would benefit from hearing your insights, and the board has been pushing me to bring in outside expertise for these discussions." His invitation represented recognition of my professional credentials in ways that felt both validating and long overdue. I agreed to consider the invitation while internally processing the magnitude of the shift in our relationship. The father who had spent years dismissing my career was now asking me to advise his company's board of directors. The daughter who had been excluded from family business discussions was being invited to participate as a professional expert. The reversal was dramatic and suggested possibilities for rebuilding our relationship on new foundations of mutual respect and recognition. The board meeting at Mitchell Manufacturing took place 3 weeks after our lunch conversation, giving me time to prepare thoroughly, while managing my own responsibilities at Midwest Financial. I approached the engagement with the same professional standards I applied to all consulting work, conducting research on the company's financial performance, market position, and competitive challenges. The preparation felt strange given my lifelong familiarity with the business, but I wanted to ensure that my recommendations were based on objective analysis rather than family relationships. The conference room at Mitchell Manufacturing hadn't changed since my childhood visits to Dad's office, but entering it as a professional consultant rather than Bob Mitchell's daughter created an entirely different dynamic. The mahogany table that had seemed enormous when I was young now appeared appropriately sized for the 8 board members who would be attending the meeting. Family photos still lined Dad's office walls, but I found myself studying them with new awareness of how family relationships and business responsibilities intersected in complex ways. David and Michael were already present when I arrived, both looking somewhat uncomfortable with the prospect of receiving professional advice from their younger sister. Our family dynamics had always positioned me as the baby of the family, whose opinions carried less weight than theirs, regardless of topic or expertise. Having me address the board as an expert consultant required them to set aside decades of established patterns and see me in an entirely new context. The other board members welcomed me with professional courtesy mixed with curiosity about my background and credentials. Frank Peterson, Dad's longtime partner, had done research on Midwest Financial since the retirement dinner and expressed genuine interest in my perspective on family business challenges. The external board members, successful business leaders in their own right, treated me with the respect typically accorded to professional consultants, while clearly being intrigued by the family dynamics underlying my presence. My presentation covered succession planning strategies, leadership development frameworks, and capital structure options that could support Mitchell Manufacturing's long-term growth and stability. I drew on case studies from similar companies while being careful to respect client confidentiality, illustrating common challenges and successful solutions without revealing proprietary information. The material was sophisticated but accessible, designed to educate board members while providing actionable recommendations for their specific situation. The questions following my presentation were thoughtful and engaged, demonstrating that the board members understood the complexity of the challenges they faced and appreciated having expert guidance to navigate them. Several questions focused on timing and implementation strategies, while others explored potential risks and mitigation approaches. The discussion was substantive and productive, exactly the kind of strategic conversation that boards should be having but often avoided due to their sensitive nature. Dad's participation in the discussion was particularly notable. He asked detailed questions about specific recommendations, while acknowledging areas where his experience and intuition might need to be supplemented with more contemporary approaches. His willingness to consider new perspectives and admit limitations reflected a humility that I had rarely seen from him in business contexts. The man who had built Mitchell Manufacturing through force of will and determination was recognizing that future success might require different strategies and skills. David and Michael's reactions were more complex and harder to interpret. Both participated in the discussion and asked relevant questions, but I sensed underlying tension about receiving advice from their younger sister, regardless of her professional qualifications. The family dynamics that had always favored them were being challenged by my expertise, and the board's obvious respect for my recommendations. They were having to confront the possibility that their assumptions about family hierarchy might not align with professional competence. The meeting concluded with the board approving several of my recommendations and requesting a more detailed implementation plan for the succession planning process. They offered to engage Midwest Financial as consultants for the project, recognizing that the work required ongoing professional support rather than a single presentation. The opportunity represented significant business for my firm, while creating an ongoing professional relationship with my family's company. After the other board members left, Dad, David, Michael, and I remained in the conference room to discuss next steps and address family implications of the consulting engagement. The conversation was awkward initially, with everyone uncertain about how to navigate the intersection of family relationships and professional responsibilities. We were venturing into uncharted territory where traditional family dynamics might not apply in the same ways. David was the first to acknowledge the elephant in the room. "This is weird for me," he admitted, looking directly at me with an expression that mixed respect and discomfort. "You clearly know more about this stuff than we do, but it's hard to adjust to seeing my little sister as a business expert who's giving advice to our board. I appreciate your insights, and I know we need this kind of help, but the family dynamics make it complicated." His honesty was refreshing and created space for a more authentic conversation about how we might work together professionally while navigating family relationships. Michael echoed similar sentiments, acknowledging that my expertise was valuable, while admitting that accepting advice from me required adjusting his understanding of our family hierarchy. Both brothers seemed genuinely committed to making the arrangement work, despite their personal discomfort with the role reversal. Dad's perspective was the most evolved and surprising. "Your presentation today reminded me of your mother," he said, his voice growing softer with emotion. "She always said you had a mind for seeing patterns and possibilities that others missed. I was too stubborn to listen then, but I can see now that she was right about your potential. Having you involved in the company's future planning feels like honoring her memory while securing our legacy." The reference to Mom was unexpected and deeply moving. She had been the one family member who had consistently encouraged my ambitions and seen potential in my different approach to problem-solving. Dad's acknowledgement that he had failed to recognize what she had seen felt like validation that transcended professional recognition. His willingness to admit past mistakes while expressing current appreciation suggested genuine change rather than temporary adjustment. Over the following months, the consulting engagement evolved into a comprehensive strategic planning process that addressed not only succession planning but also market positioning, operational efficiency, and capital allocation. I found myself spending significant time in Milwaukee, working closely with David and Michael to develop their leadership capabilities while helping Dad transition from owner-operator to chairman emeritus. The professional relationship was challenging but ultimately rewarding for everyone involved. The transformation in my brothers' attitudes was gradual but meaningful. As they experienced firsthand the value of strategic planning and professional development, their initial resistance gave way to genuine appreciation for the insights and frameworks I provided. David, in particular, embraced the leadership development process and began demonstrating strategic thinking that surprised even Dad. Michael's operational focus benefited from exposure to broader business perspectives that enhanced his effectiveness significantly. More importantly, the professional collaboration created opportunities for rebuilding family relationships on new foundations. Working together toward shared goals while respecting each other's expertise fostered mutual understanding that had been missing for years. The little sister, who had been excluded from family business discussions, was now contributing meaningfully to the company's future, while the brothers who had taken their positions for granted were developing into more capable leaders. Dad's evolution was the most dramatic and emotionally significant. The man who had dismissed my career as irrelevant was now seeking my input on major business decisions and expressing pride in my accomplishments to other business leaders. He began introducing me at industry events as his daughter, who ran a major financial firm, a description that acknowledged both our family relationship and my professional standing. The change in his attitude created possibilities for connection that I had stopped believing were possible. The success of the consulting engagement also enhanced Midwest Financial's reputation in the family business sector, leading to additional clients and opportunities for growth. Other family-owned companies in the region began requesting similar strategic planning services, recognizing the value of having advisors who understood both the business and emotional dynamics involved in succession planning. My expertise in this niche market became a competitive advantage that distinguished our firm from larger investment banks. The transformation in my family relationships created ripple effects that extended far beyond business collaboration. As Dad, David, and Michael began treating me as a professional peer rather than just a family member, other aspects of our interactions started changing as well. Family gatherings became opportunities for substantive conversations about business, economics, and industry trends, rather than superficial exchanges about weather and social activities. The woman who had been relegated to discussing recipes and vacation plans was now consulted about investment strategies and market analysis. The most significant change was in Dad's behavior at family events and social gatherings. Rather than introducing me vaguely as his daughter who lived in Chicago, he began describing my professional accomplishments with obvious pride. At his golf club, he would mention my role as board chairman and share details about successful deals I had completed. The man who had spent years dismissing my career was now using it as a source of personal validation and social status. This shift in Dad's attitude illuminated patterns that had shaped our relationship for decades. His inability to see my achievements hadn't necessarily been about gender bias alone, though that had certainly played a role. More fundamentally, he had been unable to recognize success that didn't conform to his narrow definition of legitimate business. Manufacturing was real because it created tangible products, while financial services had seemed abstract and disconnected from actual value creation. His evolving understanding of how investment banking supported the companies he respected was changing his perception of my work's significance. The change also revealed how much my professional success had been influenced by the lack of family support and recognition. Rather than being derailed by dismissal and low expectations, I had used them as motivation to prove my worth through external validation. The woman who couldn't gain respect at family gatherings had built a career commanding respect from industry leaders and corporate executives. My father's inability to see my potential had inadvertently strengthened my determination to exceed anyone's expectations. Ryan observed these dynamics with the insight of someone trained to understand family systems and organizational behavior. Your father's recognition isn't just validating your accomplishments, he noted during one of our evening conversations. It's also forcing him to confront how his assumptions limited his ability to support you earlier. That kind of self-awareness can be transformative, but it's also uncomfortable because it requires acknowledging missed opportunities and misguided beliefs. His analysis helped me understand Dad's evolving attitude with more compassion and less defensiveness. The man who had dismissed my career wasn't necessarily malicious or intentionally limiting, but rather constrained by worldviews that prevented him from recognizing possibilities outside his experience. His current efforts to understand and appreciate my work represented genuine growth that deserved acknowledgement even if it had come later than I would have preferred. Jessica's perspective was characteristically more skeptical and protective. "I'm glad he's finally seeing you clearly," she said during one of our weekly lunches. "But don't let his newfound appreciation erase the years when he couldn't be bothered to understand what you were building. People don't get credit for recognizing obvious talent after it becomes impossible to ignore." Her caution was valuable, reminding me to maintain appropriate boundaries while rebuilding trust that had been damaged over many years. The success of the Mitchell manufacturing engagement had created new challenges related to managing family and professional relationships. Other family-owned businesses in our network began requesting similar services, creating potential conflicts of interest and boundary issues that required careful navigation. I established clear policies about when Midwest Financial would work with companies connected to my family, and when potential clients would be referred to other firms to avoid complications. More significantly, the enhanced relationship with my family was creating emotional complexity that I hadn't anticipated. Years of feeling undervalued and dismissed had created protective barriers that were difficult to lower even when circumstances changed dramatically. Dad's newfound pride in my accomplishments was gratifying but also triggered unresolved feelings about the validation I had sought and been denied for so long. Learning to accept belated recognition while processing historical disappointment required ongoing emotional work. The patterns that had shaped my family relationships were also evident in broader professional contexts. Women in leadership positions often faced similar challenges in gaining recognition and respect, particularly from male colleagues and family members who held traditional views about gender roles and career priorities. My experience resonated with other successful women who had built impressive careers while struggling to gain acknowledgement from people whose approval they valued. Industry conferences and networking events provided opportunities to share experiences and strategies with other women who had navigated similar challenges. The conversations were both validating and educational, highlighting common patterns while revealing diverse approaches to building credibility and commanding respect in male-dominated environments. My story of professional success despite family dismissal was neither unique nor unusual, but rather representative of experiences shared by many women in business leadership. The consulting work with Mitchell Manufacturing was also creating new possibilities for my brother's development and our family's future. David was embracing strategic leadership responsibilities with enthusiasm that surprised everyone, while Michael was discovering analytical capabilities that enhanced his operational effectiveness significantly. Both were evolving beyond the limitations that Dad's expectations and their own assumptions had previously imposed on their potential. Most importantly, the changed family dynamics were creating space for authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than traditional hierarchies. The daughter who had been dismissed as impractical was now contributing meaningfully to family business success, while the father who had been unable to see her potential was learning to appreciate capabilities he had previously overlooked. The brothers who had benefited from favoritism were developing genuine competence that earned rather than inherited their positions. The transformation wasn't complete, or without ongoing challenges, but it represented fundamental progress in rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities. Recognition, when it finally came, created possibilities for connection and collaboration that felt authentic and sustainable, rather than forced or superficial. The professional success that had initially separated me from my family was ultimately becoming the foundation for bringing us together in new and healthier ways. The success of my professional collaboration with Mitchell Manufacturing created an unexpected dilemma that I hadn't anticipated when I first agreed to consult with Dad's board. Industry recognition for the strategic planning work was attracting attention from larger companies and private equity firms who wanted similar expertise for their own family business investments. The visibility was professionally rewarding but personally complicated, as it meant my family relationships were becoming intertwined with my business reputation in ways that felt both validating and constraining. A profile in Harvard Business Review about successful family business consultations featured the Mitchell Manufacturing engagement prominently, describing it as a model for how external expertise could help traditional companies navigate generational transitions. The article didn't mention family relationships, focusing instead on methodology and results. But people within Milwaukee's business community knew the personal context behind the professional success. The story of Bob Mitchell's daughter transforming his company's strategic direction had become local legend, told and retold at country club gatherings and Chamber of Commerce events. The attention was flattering, but also created pressure to maintain the perfect narrative of family reconciliation and professional triumph. Reality was more nuanced and complicated than the business press articles suggested. While Dad had genuinely evolved in his understanding and appreciation of my work, decades of established patterns didn't disappear overnight. Family gatherings still occasionally included moments where old assumptions surfaced, when I was expected to defer to my brother's opinions on topics where I had demonstrably more expertise. David had embraced his leadership development with impressive commitment, implementing new strategic frameworks and analytical approaches that strengthened Mitchell Manufacturing's competitive position significantly. His transformation from complacent heir to engaged executive was remarkable and suggested that low expectations had limited his potential, as much as favoritism had protected him from challenge. The consulting process had revealed capabilities that neither he nor Dad had realized existed, capabilities that emerged only when he was pushed to think beyond inherited assumptions about how business should be conducted. Michael's evolution was different, but equally significant. His natural aptitude for operations had always been evident, but exposure to broader strategic perspectives had enhanced his effectiveness dramatically. He began identifying efficiency opportunities and process improvements that generated substantial cost savings while improving product quality. More importantly, he started asking strategic questions about market positioning and competitive dynamics that demonstrated sophisticated business thinking previously hidden beneath his practical, hands-on approach to management. The brothers' development created new dynamics within the family that were both encouraging and occasionally tense. As they grew into more capable leaders, they began questioning some of Dad's traditional approaches and suggesting changes that challenged established ways of doing business. The man who had built Mitchell Manufacturing through determination and intuition was learning to delegate strategic decisions to sons who now possessed analytical frameworks he had never developed. The transition required adjustments for everyone involved. Dad's pride in his son's growth was evident and touching, but it also highlighted the missed opportunities that had characterized our family relationships for years. If strategic guidance and professional development could unlock potential in David and Michael, what might have been possible if he had invested similar energy in understanding and supporting my ambitions earlier in my career? The question wasn't accusatory, but it lingered beneath our improved relationship like a shadow that couldn't be entirely dispelled. The emotional complexity of rebuilding family relationships while maintaining professional boundaries required constant navigation. Working with Mitchell Manufacturing as a consultant meant setting aside personal history to focus on business objectives. But family gatherings inevitably included references to projects and decisions that blurred the lines between professional and personal relationships. I found myself code-switching between daughter and advisor roles in ways that were mentally exhausting, even when the interactions were positive. Ryan's perspective as both boyfriend and professional observer was invaluable during this period. He understood corporate psychology well enough to recognize healthy progress, while also identifying areas where family dynamics might be interfering with business effectiveness. "You're managing 3 different relationships with your father simultaneously," he observed one evening, after a particularly complex family dinner. "Bob the client, Dad the parent, and Robert the person trying to make amends for past mistakes. Each relationship has different needs and expectations, and sometimes they conflict with each other." His analysis was accurate and helped me understand why some interactions felt more draining than they should have given the positive trajectory of our family relationships. Professional success had created opportunities for connection that I had wanted for years, but it had also complicated the emotional landscape in ways that required ongoing attention and boundary management. Learning to accept belated recognition while processing historical disappointment was more challenging than I had expected. The consulting work was also revealing patterns in my own behavior that reflected years of adapting to dismissal and low expectations. I found myself over-preparing for family business meetings, anticipating skepticism that no longer materialized, and defending recommendations with more data than was necessary to convince clients who already trusted my judgment. The habits developed during years of having my expertise questioned didn't disappear immediately when the questioning stopped. Jessica noticed these patterns during our regular check-ins about family and business developments. "You're still acting like you have to prove yourself to them," she observed with characteristic directness. "They already respect your work and defer to your expertise, but you're responding to old dynamics that aren't current anymore. It's like you're fighting battles that ended months ago, because you're so used to being on the defensive." Her insight was uncomfortable but accurate. Professional success and family recognition hadn't automatically erased the psychological effects of years feeling undervalued and misunderstood. The woman who commanded respect from industry leaders and corporate executives was still occasionally surprised when family members sought her opinion or implemented her suggestions without resistance. Adjusting to new relationship dynamics required conscious effort and ongoing self-awareness. The broader implications of these patterns extended beyond my family situation to illuminate challenges that many women faced in gaining recognition for their professional accomplishments. The tendency to over-prepare and over-justify was common among successful women who had learned to anticipate skepticism and resistance. Even after achieving significant career milestones, many continued responding to historical patterns rather than current realities, a form of professional trauma that influenced behavior long after circumstances had changed. Industry colleagues shared similar experiences during conferences and networking events, describing how childhood family dynamics and early career experiences had shaped their approach to leadership and decision-making. The conversation were both validating and educational, highlighting common themes while revealing diverse strategies for managing the intersection of personal history and professional development. My story resonated with other women who had built impressive careers while navigating complex family relationships and gender expectations. The visibility from the Harvard Business Review article and other media coverage was creating new opportunities for speaking engagements and board positions that could significantly enhance my career trajectory. Several Fortune 500 companies had reached out about potential board appointments, recognizing that my expertise in family business dynamics was valuable for their own strategic planning and succession issues. The opportunities represented professional advancement that I had been working toward for years. However, accepting these high-profile positions would require even more careful boundary management with my family relationships. Serving on corporate boards while consulting with Mitchell Manufacturing could create conflicts of interest or appearance issues that might complicate both professional and personal dynamics. The success that had brought my family together might also create new challenges that required thoughtful navigation to maintain the progress we had achieved. Dad's reaction to the board appointment opportunities was telling and somewhat surprising. Rather than expressing concern about potential conflicts or divided loyalties, he encouraged me to pursue the positions that offered the greatest professional advancement. "Your expertise is valuable to more than just our family company," he said during one of our regular strategy meetings. "You've helped us tremendously, but you shouldn't limit your impact to Mitchell Manufacturing. Other companies need what you can offer, and you deserve recognition at the highest levels of business leadership." His encouragement represented a fundamental shift from the man who had once dismissed my career as irrelevant to real business. The father who had failed to see my potential was now actively supporting my advancement beyond his own company's needs. The transformation suggested genuine change rather than temporary adjustment, creating confidence that our rebuilt relationship could withstand the pressures of continued professional growth and geographic distance. The decision about which board appointments to accept required careful consideration of multiple factors, including strategic fit, time commitment, potential conflicts, and long-term career objectives. More importantly, it required honest assessment of my own readiness for the increased visibility and responsibility that came with Fortune 500 board service. The professional success that had started with proving myself to skeptical family members was evolving into opportunities to influence major corporations and shape industry practices. The board appointment process introduced me to a level of corporate politics and relationship management that was both fascinating and exhausting. 3 different companies had extended serious inquiries about my potential service, each representing distinct opportunities for professional growth and industry influence. The selection process required multiple interviews with existing board members, detailed background checks, and comprehensive reviews of my professional history and expertise areas. North Star Industries, a diversified manufacturing conglomerate based in Detroit, was seeking board members with expertise in family business succession planning and strategic financial restructuring. Their portfolio included several family-owned subsidiaries that were facing generational transition challenges, similar to what I had helped address at Mitchell Manufacturing. The company's CEO, Margaret Chen, was known for building high-performing boards that provided strategic guidance rather than simply rubber-stamping management decisions. Great Lakes Energy, a utility holding company with operations across the Midwest, needed board expertise in regulatory affairs and capital allocation strategies. Their business model was evolving rapidly due to renewable energy mandates and changing consumer expectations about environmental responsibility. The company was navigating complex transitions that required both financial sophistication and stakeholder management skills, areas where my background could provide valuable perspective. Pinnacle Financial Services, a regional banking institution with national ambitions, was expanding their board to include more expertise in investment banking and corporate finance. Their growth strategy involved acquiring smaller community banks and integrating them into a larger platform that could compete with national institutions. The work would draw directly on my experience at Midwest Financial while providing exposure to different aspects of the financial services industry. Each opportunity offered distinct advantages and challenges that required careful evaluation. North Star Industries would leverage my family business expertise most directly, while providing exposure to industrial sectors beyond manufacturing. Great Lakes Energy would expand my understanding of regulated industries and environmental policy, areas that were becoming increasingly important for all types of businesses. Pinnacle Financial Services would build on my existing expertise while offering insights into different business models and growth strategies. The interview processes were rigorous and illuminating, providing glimpses into different corporate cultures and governance philosophies. North Star's board meetings were highly structured and analytical, focusing on detailed performance reviews and strategic planning exercises that reminded me of consulting engagements. Great Lakes Energy emphasized stakeholder engagement and risk management, reflecting the regulatory environment and public scrutiny that characterized utility operations. Pinnacle Financial Services operated more like an entrepreneurial venture despite their size, with board discussions that were fast-paced and decision-oriented. Margaret Chen's leadership style at North Star particularly impressed me during the interview process. She had built her career in manufacturing and understood the operational challenges that family-owned businesses faced when scaling their operations or transitioning leadership. Her questions during our interview demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both strategic frameworks and implementation challenges, suggesting that board service would be intellectually stimulating and professionally developmental. The timing of these opportunities coincided with significant developments at Mitchell Manufacturing that required ongoing attention and support. David and Michael were implementing organizational changes based on our strategic planning work, creating new reporting structures and performance measurement systems that represented fundamental shifts in how the company operated. Dad was transitioning from day-to-day operational involvement to more strategic oversight, a change that required careful management to ensure continuity and effectiveness. My consulting relationship with Mitchell Manufacturing had evolved into something more resembling an ongoing advisory role that provided strategic guidance while respecting the family's autonomy in making final decisions. The arrangement worked well for everyone involved, giving them access to expertise while maintaining clear boundaries between family relationships and business responsibilities. However, accepting board positions with other companies would require reducing my availability for Mitchell Manufacturing projects. The conversation about board appointments with my family was more complex than I had anticipated. Dad was genuinely supportive of my career advancement, but David and Michael expressed concerns about losing access to strategic guidance that had become valuable to their leadership development. They weren't trying to limit my opportunities, but rather seeking assurance that our professional collaboration could continue even if my time became more constrained. We worked out an arrangement that would allow me to maintain strategic oversight with Mitchell Manufacturing while pursuing board service that enhanced my expertise and industry knowledge. The consulting engagement would shift from project-based work to quarterly strategic reviews and specific advisory support as needed. The compromise satisfied everyone's needs while creating space for my professional growth beyond the family business context. Ryan's perspective on the board appointment decisions was characteristically insightful and supportive. These opportunities represent recognition of your expertise at the highest levels of corporate America, he observed. 6 months ago, your family didn't understand what you did for a living. Now you're being recruited for Fortune 500 boards based on work that started with helping your father's retirement planning. The trajectory is remarkable and suggests that the best opportunities are still ahead of you. His encouragement was valuable because the magnitude of the career advancement was somewhat overwhelming. The progression from being dismissed at family gatherings to being courted by major corporations felt surreal and required ongoing adjustment of my own expectations and self-perception. Professional success had accelerated beyond what I had imagined possible when I first started consulting with Mitchell Manufacturing, creating opportunities that demanded new levels of confidence and strategic thinking. Jessica's reaction was characteristically practical and protective. Make sure you're choosing opportunities that advance your career, rather than just validating your expertise, she advised during one of our strategy discussions. Board service can be professionally developmental or just time-consuming, depending on the company culture and your role within the governance structure. Choose the positions that will teach you something new and expand your influence, rather than simply confirming what you already know. Her guidance helped me focus on strategic considerations rather than emotional satisfaction when evaluating the board opportunities. While recognition was gratifying, the decisions needed to be based on professional development objectives and long-term career planning, rather than short-term validation. The companies that offered the greatest learning opportunities and influence potential were the ones worth pursuing regardless of immediate prestige or compensation considerations. After extensive deliberation and consultation with mentors and advisors, I decided to accept the board position with North Star Industries while maintaining ongoing discussions with the other companies about future opportunities. North Star offered the best combination of strategic fit, learning opportunities, and cultural alignment, while allowing me to maintain my consulting relationship with Mitchell Manufacturing without conflicts of interest. The announcement of my board appointment generated significant media attention within the business community, with several publications noting that I was among the youngest directors ever appointed to North Star's board. The coverage was professionally beneficial, while also highlighting the broader trend toward younger and more diverse board composition that was transforming corporate governance across multiple industries. Dad's pride in the appointment was evident and touching, representing a complete reversal from his historical dismissal of my career achievements. He mentioned the board appointment to colleagues and business associates with obvious satisfaction, treating my success as a reflection of family values and business acumen. The man who had once questioned whether my work constituted real business was now using my accomplishments as a source of personal and professional validation. The first North Star board meeting was both intimidating and exhilarating, providing immediate immersion into corporate governance at a scale and complexity beyond my previous experience. The other board members were accomplished executives and industry leaders, whose expertise spanned multiple sectors and functional areas. The discussions were sophisticated and fast-paced, requiring quick assimilation of complex information and strategic analysis under time pressure. Margaret Chen's leadership during the board meeting was impressive and educational, demonstrating how effective governance could enhance rather than constrain management effectiveness. She facilitated discussions that drew on each member's expertise while maintaining focus on strategic priorities and fiduciary responsibilities. The meeting structure balanced oversight obligations with strategic guidance in ways that felt productive rather than bureaucratic. My contributions to the board discussions were well received and built credibility quickly, establishing my voice within the governance process while respecting the experience and expertise of longer-serving members. The family business succession planning experience that had started with Mitchell Manufacturing proved directly relevant to several North Star portfolio companies, providing immediate opportunities to add value while learning about different industries and business models. The board appointment also created new networking opportunities with executives and directors from other major corporations, expanding my professional relationships beyond the financial services and manufacturing sectors where I had built my initial reputation. These connections would prove valuable for future career opportunities, while also enhancing my effectiveness as a strategic advisor and business leader. The visibility from my North Star Industries board appointment created unexpected consequences that rippled through both my professional and personal life in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Industry publications began featuring me in articles about women in corporate governance and next-generation business leaders, positioning me as an expert voice on topics ranging from family business succession to strategic planning in traditional industries. The media attention was professionally beneficial, but also created pressure to maintain public positions on complex issues that affected multiple stakeholders. Speaking engagements began arriving regularly, with conference organizers seeking presentations about family business dynamics, board governance best practices, and women's leadership development. The requests came from prestigious venues including the Harvard Business School Alumni Conference, the National Association of Corporate Directors annual meeting, and several industry-specific conferences focused on manufacturing and financial services. Each opportunity offered professional development while building my reputation as a thought leader in business strategy and governance. The speaking circuit introduced me to a network of accomplished women executives who had navigated similar challenges in building credibility and influence within male-dominated industries. These relationships were both personally validating and professionally valuable, creating opportunities for mentorship, collaboration, and mutual support that enhanced my effectiveness as a business leader. The conversations often revealed common patterns in how successful women had managed family expectations, career advancement, and work-life integration. Linda Patterson, CEO of a major consumer products company, became a particularly important mentor during this period. She had built her career through strategic roles at various corporations before ascending to executive leadership, and her perspective on managing high-visibility positions was invaluable. The key to sustainable success at this level is maintaining authenticity while adapting to different stakeholder expectations, she advised during one of our quarterly coffee meetings. Don't let external recognition change your fundamental approach to business or relationships, but do recognize that your influence now extends beyond immediate professional circles. Her guidance helped me navigate the increased scrutiny and expectations that came with board service and media visibility. The woman who had struggled to gain recognition within her own family was now being positioned as a role model for other women in business, a responsibility that felt both honored and overwhelming. The transition from seeking validation to providing inspiration required conscious adjustment of mindsets and communication approaches. The success was also creating new dynamics within my family that required ongoing attention and management. While Dad, David, and Michael were genuinely proud of my achievements, the media attention and professional recognition sometimes created subtle tensions during family gatherings. My career had become a frequent topic of conversation in ways that felt both validating and occasionally uncomfortable, as if my professional identity was overshadowing other aspects of our family relationships. David expressed these concerns most directly during a private conversation after a particularly media-heavy week when my photograph had appeared in Forbes and Business Week. "I'm really proud of what you've accomplished," he said, his tone mixing genuine admiration with underlying concern. "But sometimes it feels like you've become more of a celebrity than my sister. I miss being able to talk about normal family stuff without everything relating back to your latest interview or board meeting." His feedback was valuable and highlighted the importance of maintaining balance between professional success and family relationships. The recognition that had initially brought us together was beginning to create new forms of distance that required conscious effort to address. We agreed to establish better boundaries around business discussions during family time, while ensuring that my career achievements didn't dominate every conversation or gathering. Michael's perspective was somewhat different but equally thoughtful. He appreciated the credibility that my success brought to Mitchell Manufacturing's reputation within the industry, but worried about whether the family business would always be overshadowed by my individual accomplishments. The consulting work had strengthened the company significantly, but ongoing media references to it as a case study in family business transformation created pressure to maintain performance levels that might not be sustainable long-term. These family conversations illuminated the complex dynamics that successful women often faced in balancing individual achievement with relationship maintenance. Professional recognition could strain family bonds if not managed carefully, particularly when success exceeded what family members had anticipated or felt comfortable acknowledging. The challenges were different from those I had faced when seeking recognition, but they required equally thoughtful navigation to preserve relationships that had been rebuilt over months of careful work. Dad's reaction to the media attention was consistently positive and supportive, but it also revealed how completely his perception of my worth had been transformed by external validation. The father who had dismissed my career for years was now collecting newspaper clippings and magazine articles about my achievements, sharing them with friends and business associates at every opportunity. His pride was genuine and touching, but it also highlighted how much his understanding of success depended on public recognition, rather than intrinsic value. The irony wasn't lost on me that Dad's appreciation for my accomplishments had grown in direct proportion to their visibility, rather than their substance. The strategic planning work that had transformed Mitchell Manufacturing's competitive position was intrinsically valuable regardless of media coverage, but his pride seemed more connected to external recognition than internal impact. The pattern reflected broader cultural tendencies to value achievement based on public acknowledgement rather than actual contribution. Ryan's perspective on these family dynamics was characteristically insightful and helpful. "Your success is forcing everyone to adjust their understanding of family roles and individual capabilities," he observed. "That's positive overall, but it creates temporary instability while people figure out new ways of relating to each other. The key is maintaining connection and communication while allowing relationships to evolve, rather than trying to preserve old patterns that no longer fit current realities." His analysis helped me approach family conversations with patience and understanding rather than frustration when tensions arose. The transformation in our relationships was ultimately positive, but it required ongoing adjustment as everyone learned to navigate new dynamics and expectations. Professional success had created opportunities for deeper connection, but it also demanded conscious effort to maintain balance and authenticity. The board work at North Star Industries was proving professionally developmental in ways that exceeded my expectations. Exposure to different business models, regulatory environments, and strategic challenges was expanding my expertise while building credibility within new industry sectors. The other board members treated me as a peer whose contributions were valued, creating opportunities for learning and influence that accelerated my professional growth significantly. Margaret Chen's mentorship was particularly valuable during board meetings and strategic planning sessions. She provided guidance on effective governance practices while creating opportunities for me to lead discussions in areas where my expertise was most relevant. Her leadership style demonstrated how successful executives could develop others while advancing organizational objectives, a model that I began incorporating into my own approach to team development and strategic planning. The family business succession planning expertise that had started with Mitchell Manufacturing was proving applicable to multiple North Star portfolio companies, creating opportunities to influence strategic decisions affecting thousands of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. The work was intellectually challenging and personally satisfying, representing the kind of impact I had hoped to achieve when I first started building my career in financial services. However, the increased responsibilities and time commitments were creating pressure on other aspects of my life, including my relationship with Ryan and my consulting work with other clients. Success was generating new opportunities faster than I could evaluate them properly, requiring more disciplined prioritization and boundary setting to maintain effectiveness and personal well-being. The challenge was choosing among multiple attractive options rather than seeking opportunities, a problem that was preferable to previous circumstances but still required careful management. The transformation from being dismissed by family members to being recruited by Fortune 500 companies had occurred with remarkable speed, creating cognitive dissonance that required ongoing processing and adjustment. Professional success had exceeded my most optimistic expectations, while simultaneously creating new challenges and responsibilities that demanded continuous learning and adaptation. The journey from Table 12 at Dad's retirement dinner to North Star Industries' boardroom represented more than career advancement. It reflected fundamental changes in how I understood my own capabilities and potential for influence. The quarterly board meeting at North Star Industries in late autumn brought news that would test everything I had learned about managing family business dynamics and professional relationships. Margaret Chen announced that the company was considering acquiring a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Wisconsin that specialized in industrial equipment and had been family-owned for 3 generations. The preliminary analysis suggested strong strategic fit and attractive financial metrics, but the acquisition would require careful handling of succession planning issues that had complicated the sale process. As she described the target company's profile, I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Mitchell Manufacturing Solutions matched every characteristic she mentioned in terms of size, location, industry focus, and family ownership structure. When she mentioned that the company was based in Milwaukee and had been founded in the early 1980s by an entrepreneur who had built it into a regional powerhouse, my suspicions crystallized into certainty. North Star Industries was considering acquiring my father's company. The ethical implications were immediate and complex. As a North Star board member, I had fiduciary responsibilities to evaluate potential acquisitions objectively based on their strategic and financial merits. As a consultant to Mitchell Manufacturing, I had obligations to protect their interests and maintain confidentiality about their operations and strategic plans. As Bob Mitchell's daughter, I was emotionally invested in preserving the family legacy that Dad, David, and Michael had worked to build and strengthen. Margaret Chen's presentation continued with preliminary financial analysis that demonstrated impressive understanding of Mitchell Manufacturing's competitive position and growth potential. The strategic rationale for acquisition was compelling, suggesting that North Star's resources and expertise could accelerate growth while preserving the company's operational independence and management team. The terms being considered would provide substantial financial returns for the Mitchell family, while ensuring continued employment for the workforce that Dad had always prioritized. The other board members asked thoughtful questions about integration challenges, market dynamics, and competitive positioning that revealed sophisticated analysis of the opportunity. Their discussion was professional and objective, focusing on business considerations without awareness of my personal connection to the target company. I found myself in the unprecedented position of listening to strangers evaluate my family's business with clinical detachment while I struggled to maintain professional composure. When Margaret asked for initial reactions and concerns from board members, I faced a moment of truth that would determine both my professional integrity and family relationships. Revealing my connection to Mitchell Manufacturing would require recusing myself from the acquisition evaluation, potentially damaging my credibility with North Star while eliminating my ability to influence the process. Remaining silent would allow me to protect my family's interests from inside the decision-making process, but would violate my fiduciary duties to North Star and ethical obligations as a board member. I need to disclose a potential conflict of interest, I said, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil churning beneath the surface. Mitchell Manufacturing Solutions is my father's company, and I've been serving as a strategic consultant to them for the past year. I have both professional and personal relationships that would create conflicts with objective evaluation of this acquisition opportunity. I should recuse myself from any discussions or decisions related to this potential transaction. The silence that followed my disclosure was profound and uncomfortable. Margaret's expression shifted from surprise to concern as she processed the implications of my announcement. The other board members exchanged glances that suggested they were rapidly reassessing both the acquisition opportunity and my continued participation in the evaluation process. The professional reputation I had built over months of effective board service was suddenly complicated by family connections that created unprecedented governance challenges. Margaret's response was measured and professional, reflecting her experience in managing complex business situations. "Thank you for the disclosure, Sarah," she said after a moment of consideration. "Your transparency is appreciated and demonstrates the kind of professional integrity we value in our board members. We'll need to determine the appropriate process for managing this conflict, while ensuring that our evaluation remains objective and thorough. Let's take a brief recess to discuss procedural options." During the break, I stepped outside the conference room to call Ryan and process the emotional complexity of the situation. The conversation was brief but grounding, helping me focus on professional obligations rather than family loyalty concerns. "You did the right thing by disclosing immediately," he assured me. "Professional integrity has to come first, and your reputation depends on handling conflicts transparently rather than trying to manage them secretly. Trust that your family will understand your position, even if the outcome isn't what they would prefer." His support was valuable because the decision to disclose had created immediate uncertainty about both my board position and my family relationships. North Star might question my judgment in accepting the board position without anticipating potential conflicts, while my family might view the disclosure as betrayal of their interests in favor of corporate loyalty. The situation required navigating competing obligations with limited precedent for guidance. When the board meeting resumed, Margaret outlined the process that would govern my participation in acquisition-related discussions. I would be recused from all evaluation activities, including financial analysis, strategic assessment, and final decision-making. However, my general expertise in family business dynamics and succession planning could be valuable in understanding industry trends and competitive dynamics that might affect the decision indirectly. The arrangement preserved my board position while managing conflict concerns appropriately. The other board members expressed understanding and support for the disclosure decision, recognizing that family business connections were common in regional markets, and that transparency was preferable to undisclosed conflicts. Their reaction suggested that my professional reputation remained intact despite the complication, though the situation would require ongoing careful management to maintain credibility and effectiveness. Over the following weeks, I watched from the sidelines as North Star's evaluation process advanced through due diligence, management interviews, and strategic analysis. The professional detachment required was emotionally challenging, particularly when I learned that David and Michael were responding positively to acquisition discussions, while Dad remained ambivalent about selling the company he had spent 4 decades building. Their perspectives reflected generational differences about legacy, financial security, and professional autonomy that were common in family business transitions. The acquisition evaluation also provided insight into how external parties viewed Mitchell Manufacturing's transformation over the past year. North Star's analysis credited the strategic planning initiatives and leadership development programs with significantly enhancing the company's value and growth potential. The consulting work that had started as family relationship repair was being recognized as legitimate business improvement that justified premium acquisition pricing. Margaret Chen's updates during regular board meetings suggested that Mitchell Manufacturing was exceeding North Star's expectations in most evaluation criteria. The financial performance was strong, the management team was capable and committed, and the market position was sustainable and defensible. The primary challenges were emotional rather than business-related, centered on Dad's reluctance to relinquish control and uncertainty about how acquisition might affect company culture and employee relationships. These concerns were familiar from my consulting work with other family-owned businesses facing succession decisions. The founders who had built companies through personal vision and determination often struggled with transferring ownership to entities that might not share their values or commitment to stakeholder welfare. Dad's hesitation reflected genuine care for employees and community relationships, rather than simple attachment to control or status. The acquisition discussions also created new dynamics within my family that required careful navigation. David and Michael were excited about the financial opportunities and professional development possibilities that North Star ownership might provide, while Dad remained focused on preserving company independence and maintaining legacy commitments. Their different perspectives created tension during family gatherings that I couldn't address directly due to my recusal from North Star's evaluation process. My ability to provide strategic guidance to my family was constrained by confidentiality obligations to North Star and ethical requirements to avoid influencing the acquisition decision. The consultant who had helped transform Mitchell Manufacturing's strategic position was now unable to advise them during the most important decision in the company's history. The situation was professionally frustrating and personally painful, highlighting how success could create new forms of limitation and constraint. Jessica's perspective on the ethical dilemma was characteristically direct and supportive. "You're handling an impossible situation with integrity and professionalism," she observed during one of our weekly conversations. "There's no perfect solution when family relationships and professional obligations conflict, but transparency and honesty are always preferable to secrecy and manipulation. Your family will respect your position even if they don't initially understand it." Her encouragement was valuable because the disclosure decision had created ongoing stress and uncertainty that affected both my board effectiveness and family relationships. Professional success had seemed to resolve the conflicts between career advancement and family acceptance, but the acquisition situation revealed that new challenges could emerge at any time, requiring difficult choices between competing loyalties and obligations. The resolution, when it came, was both satisfying and anticlimactic. After 6 weeks of evaluation, North Star Industries decided not to proceed with the Mitchell Manufacturing acquisition, citing concerns about integration complexity and market timing rather than any fundamental problems with the company or opportunity. The decision was disappointing from a strategic perspective, but relieved enormous personal pressure regarding family relationships and professional conflicts. Dad's reaction to the decision was complex, combining relief about maintaining independence with recognition that the acquisition discussions had validated Mitchell Manufacturing's value and strategic position. The evaluation process had confirmed that the company transformation over the past year was substantial and sustainable, providing confidence about future growth potential regardless of ownership structure. The validation was professionally satisfying even though the outcome preserved family control. Margaret Chin's feedback about my handling of the conflict situation was encouraging and professionally valuable. "Your disclosure and recusal demonstrated exactly the kind of professional integrity that makes board service effective," she said during our next one-on-one meeting. "These situations test character and judgment more than business expertise, and you handled it flawlessly. The experience actually enhanced, rather than damaged, my confidence in your board contributions." Her assessment provided reassurance that professional relationships had survived the ethical challenge intact, while establishing precedent for managing future conflicts that might arise. Board service at the highest levels required navigating complex situations where personal and professional interests intersected, and successful management of those challenges was essential for long-term effectiveness and credibility. The entire experience reinforced lessons about integrity, transparency, and relationship management that would guide future decision-making in both professional and personal contexts. Success created opportunities, but also responsibilities that demanded careful attention to ethical considerations and stakeholder impacts. The woman who had struggled to gain recognition within her own family was now managing conflicts between family loyalty and corporate fiduciary duties, a transformation that reflected both professional advancement and personal growth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.